Set your course for the Hoth
Takes podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hoth Takes. I'm Grace Seegers.
I'm Eric Yeller.
And I'm Haley Birdwelt.
So I'm kind of going to be taking the lead for today's episode because it is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And that is episode 2 of the Star Wars series, Attack of the Clones, a cinematic masterpiece, beloved by all, as I'm sure you know. Actually, most people hate it, and I feel like that's unnecessary. So I wanted to set up this episode to give Attack of the Clones some love, and also as kind of a way for 12-year-old Grace, who is obsessed with this movie, like embarrassingly obsessed, to have her moment in the sun. So I will run through kind of how I envision this conversation going. I am going to start with a brief defense of the movie, and then we will go from there. So, to start off, Attack of the Clones. Is it a good movie? No. But you know, what is a good movie, really? And by my completely subjective qualifications, it is in fact a good movie. So some of the things that I have written down in my notes, because I prepared notes for this, is that I actually think that the action is very solid, especially the third act on Geonosis. That's pretty dope. There are some very cool lightsaber duels. I know people love to hate on the duel between Yoda and Count Dooku, but I think it's pretty awesome. Also, Christopher Lee being in the movie just raises its quality by 30% on its own automatically. I also put down Obi-Wan's plotline, which is a really fun kind of noir mystery. Plus the hilarity and convolutedness of the Camino plot, which really is, I mean, so ridiculous that he just stumbles upon this convenient clone army and he's like, yeah, well, I guess don't look a gift clone army in the mouth, and just rolls with it. So side note to that, the Attack of the Clones also contributes to world building for The Mandalorian, because without Temuera Morrison playing Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones, we wouldn't have Temuera Morrison playing Boba Fett in The Mandalorian a couple decades later, so that's pretty dope. I will add a couple more things before I branch off into our conversation. First of all, I think it's actually inspired to have Anakin be a whiny teenager with untreated PTSD. I know a lot of the complaints when the movie was first coming out was that he wasn't very badass. And it's like, yeah, no, he's not. He's a hot f***ing mess and a 19-year-old. And who isn't, doing poorly at age 19, especially, when you're a former slave and live in this weird order and have a crush on a girl for 10 years. So I actually think it adds a lot of depth to his character to have him be a whiny teenager. And finally, extremely importantly, Padme, played by the effervescent Natalie Portman, who is just a great character in general. In Attack of the Clones, she gets to shine because she gets to do politics, and she gets to do some fight scenes. Her costumes are incredible, particularly in the third act on Geonosis, when she is wearing this beautiful white jumpsuit that conveniently gets ripped, showing her midriff, and she looks awesome. And so finally, stemming from that, talking to other queer Star Wars fans, such as myself, we have all agreed that Attack of the Clones is an important cultural touchstone for many queer kids who watched it as a pre-adolescent, including myself, as it helped us realize that we were into Hayden Christensen, into Natalie Portman, or in my case, into both. So that is my defense of Attack of the Clones. which is a cinematic treasure, and I love it unabashedly.
All right, I think Haley and I both have things to say. Haley, I'm happy to have you go first.
Okay, so I will be a little less ironic with my appreciation here. I was a toddler when Attack of the Clones came out. I grew up watching this movie over and over and over again. It was my favorite as a child. And like I unironically loved it, and I didn't know until recently that it was like the most universally hated Star Wars movie. I'm still not really sure why everybody hates it so much. I did rewatch it recently and was not as impressed as I was when I was a toddler. So I think part of it is like, you know, at its heart, it's a film for children. Even though it has like a lot of, you know, complex themes about like politics and, you know, fascism and being a whiny teenager like Anakin is in this film. But like as a kid, I loved it because you have everything. You have a romance, you have a mystery, you have this amazing gladiator scene at the end with the monsters. It is so very cool. You have the robots, the droids are very cool. Roger, Roger. You also have the clones. I mean, it just contains so many like interesting parts of the world, and also like world building. Like you get to see Coruscant in a way that you hadn't seen it before, which I think, you know, just sort of set up this very cool setting for a lot of, you know, where Star Wars is, you know, located. I was just rewatching part of it, and you have this hover car chase scene with Anakin and Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan falls like 50 stories, and Anakin manages to catch him in this car. And, you know, it's sort of like the movie doesn't always make sense, but it's super fun. Yes. And like if you enjoy, like if you look at it as a child would, you see why a lot of kids who grew up with this movie actually did enjoy it when it came out, even though like the dialogue was sort of, you know, clunky and all that.
Haley, thank you so much. You've just validated me and my unironic love for that movie as a child. So it's so good. It's so good. When you're a kid, it's just like perfection.
I mean, there were like things that I didn't really appreciate as a child that were scary, like the sand people and Anakin's mom.
Yeah.
But of course, like that's a very important component of the movie. And as an adult, you sort of appreciate these things more. Like in the first 10 minutes, Obi-Wan is giving Anakin a lecture about like political campaign finance, and like that made its way into the movie. It's pretty hilarious. But I also, of course, the end battle scene is just the coolest. Like the clones show up, then you have Yoda do his duel with Count Dooku, which is amazing if you're a child watching it. You know, some adults maybe did not appreciate it as much, but I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the speeder chase, Haley, because I think that highlights one of the least appreciated things about this movie, which is it really starts to give us the Anakin Obi-Wan sort of dynamic that ultimately we just did not get enough of, and that is one of the biggest accomplishments of the Clone Wars in terms of filling in things that we didn't get in the movies, is showing us that relationship. Well, here you start to see what it's like, and there's this great moment where, you know, Anakin jumps out of the speeder to try to catch, you know, the bounty hunter as she's driving away, and Obi-Wan, you know, I hate it when he does that, and you know he takes the speeder and tries to catch him, and it is at once chaotic and sort of spontaneous, but then also you can clearly tell that they've done a lot of things like this together because they have this rhythm. Anakin loses his lightsaber, and Obi-Wan is sort of right there ready to catch it. Anakin then obviously ends up having to catch Obi-Wan. I guess that's earlier in the chase, but there's this rhythm, and you can tell just from the way that all that is staged, that they've done this before, that Anakin is a little bit of a hothead, but ultimately he wants to do the right thing, and he's there for Obi-Wan when it counts. And that's just a great, like, that scene right there is just a very compact example of character development, because it gives you a taste of that relationship. And of course, you know, Revenge of the Sith, we end up seeing more of that kind of humor. But in this movie, that's honestly, if you think about how how rarely Anakin and Obi-Wan are together in this movie. I mean, there's that scene, there's a couple others, and then there's, the scene in the Geonosian arena where they kind of, say, we came to rescue you, nice job. It's moments like that are, I think, what a lot of Star Wars fans were hoping for after The Phantom Menace in terms of seeing how these two characters interact. So that was great. I have to obviously mention the politics. Probably my favorite thing about this movie is that it really shows you how Palpatine is able to start building or really start sort of executing on this web of machinations that he set up. You obviously get hints of his plan with the discovery of the army and the capture of Obi-Wan, setting up this execution scene, and you can sort of tell that things are not going well for the Republic, and you don't necessarily understand that it's him pulling the strings yet if you're watching this chronologically, but, there's that great scene at the end where Dooku comes to Coruscant and, sort of says everything's going the way you wanted it to, and that was, to me, a great payoff for the brokenness of the Republic, which we see in The Phantom Menace, of course. Now we start to see how things get violent, right? We start to understand that, okay, there is this, it's not just that the Trade Federation built this droid army to protect its ships and ended up using them to invade Naboo. It's actually that there's this entire alliance that has gotten together, and these aren't just defensive droids that have been repurposed. This was an army from the beginning. I love how dysfunctional everything is because, as we see in Revenge of the Sith, and hopefully we can do an entire episode about this at some point, it's very much a cautionary tale about what happens when you allow society to get this fractured, and, ultimately we see where that leads. The only other thing I'll say is I love the Coruscant world building too, like Haley mentioned. With the chase, you get to see the underworld. You get to see Dex's diner, which is fun. Shout out to Dex for just being a total pro. Like, the man has, 4 arms and just endless love for Obi-Wan, and I'm totally here for it. So, yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's a fun look at a part of the Star Wars universe, at multiple parts of the Star Wars universe that we hadn't seen before. And, I guess we can get into some of the criticism later, but those are some of the highlights.
You sort of got into it, but one other thing I appreciate about the film is that it really starts to introduce the idea, the Jedi Order is not doing well. And these aren't always the good guys. For instance, they find this clone army and they have no idea where it came from or why Sifo-Dyas supposedly started to have it created, and by the end of the movie they're just like, whatever, who cares, we'll just use the army. And there was no introspection or thinking about, could this be used against us? And I think there's even a line in the movie, I could be thinking about the third one, but where Mace Windu and Yoda are talking, and he's like, yeah, should we tell people that we're not being able to use the Force as well as we used to? And it just really highlights the weaknesses there that the Jedi are facing.
Yeah, there's the end, I mean, everybody remembers Yoda saying, begun the Clone War has, but right before that he says the shroud of the dark side has fallen, which is a great indication that they recognize that, as he says in the next movie, our ability to use the Force has been diminished, and they're in the middle of this drama where they understand that somebody is poking at them and preventing them from living up to what they're supposed to be, but they don't know who, they don't know how. They can sort of tell that something's not right here. I mean, the whole Sifo-Dyas thing very obviously raises red flags to them, but Haley, you're right. They don't really take the time to interrogate what it means that something is going wrong. And I suppose one could argue that they don't necessarily have the time with this war going on, but they're supposed to be better than that. And this is just an example of how Sidious is boxing them in.
Yeah, I would add too that something that this movie is really good at, actually, which is interesting considering that it has a lot of clunky dialogue, is that it's pretty good at showing, not telling. And that's especially true, like you mentioned, Eric, with the character building scenes, with the world building, with even the music in the background giving you important cues, particularly if you have watched the older movies first. After Yoda says the shroud of the dark side has fallen, begun the Clone Wars have. And then it starts playing the bum 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 bum.
And by the way, as that music is playing, as you see the Senate delegation looking out at the army, and there's another great example of showing not telling, which is if you look closely, you can see Bail Organa sort of pound his fist into the sort of the, I don't know what you like, the edge of whatever walkway they're on. Like he has lost and he knows it.
Yeah, and I think that also the Clone Wars TV series, it really informed that series, and I feel like you can't understand and appreciate the series without having the setup from Attack of the Clones, because all of those elements like Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship, even Anakin and Padme's relationship, that's all expanded upon in the series, but you wouldn't have had that unless you had the beginning, sowed the seeds of their relationship in Attack of the Clones. So that's something else that I really appreciated. Oh, another thing to mention before I forget, as we were talking about the awesomeness of Coruscant, is how we also got a kind of show not tell look at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, which is really cool, and Jedi culture. So we see Obi-Wan going to the Jedi Temple library, attempting to find this star system, interacting with Jocasta Nu, the librarian, who is super cool, and in this movie is just like very pretentious and overprotective of the library. But then you see Obi-Wan go to a class being taught by Yoda, and he's teaching younglings. And so you really get an idea for how the Jedi Temple works, and also that this is a kind of massive order. There are thousands of people, beings involved, and it really has this legacy and history and weight to it. And you get all of that just by seeing a couple of scenes, like in this big library and in a classroom.
Also, Yoda puts Obi-Wan on blast, which I think not enough people appreciate, totally calling him out in front of all the kids for losing a planet, which is very funny. But also, Jocasta Nu is kind of a great example of the arrogance of the Jedi, in that if she can't find the planet, then he must be wrong. His sources must be wrong, because how could the Jedi be wrong about something?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, how it really does show the arrogance of the Jedi there. Now, something that is very important to this movie that we haven't really touched on, but that I want to ask both of you about, is the romance between Anakin and Padme. So when I was 12, I was like, this is the most romantic thing I have ever seen in my entire life. There are absolutely no red flags here. But watching as an adult, you're like, this is kind of sketchy. So,
it's nothing but red flags.
I mean, I will also say as a kid, I thought it was like, wow, that's cool. And I think a lot of it is the setting. Like, it was filmed in Italy, and she has this beautiful outfit, and I think there's several different outfits, and they're all very cool. They get to ride those creatures in like the grass. They have a picnic. Like, to me as a child, that all sounds like peak fun times. But I think, like, when you watch it later, what I appreciate is it sort of sets up, like, this romance from the start was manipulated by Palpatine, and like he intended for it to be a destructive force for Anakin, and you really get that sense in this movie that you maybe missed as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I think even at one point, I'm going to paraphrase it, but when Anakin and Padme are talking about how they want to get together, and Padme is wearing this ridiculous black leather dominatrix dress, and they're sitting in front of a sexy fireplace.
That's basically, by the way, that's like the dress equivalent of, like, I'm not touching you. Like, what are you talking about, seduction? I don't know what you're talking about. Me? Try to seduce you? I'm just sitting here in a nice little dress. I wear this every Saturday. This is my Saturday afternoon dress.
So anyway, they're in that ridiculous outfit, in that, like, low-lit room with the fireplace, and they're talking about how they can't be together, and I'm tormented by the kiss that you never should have given me, and all that jazz. And Padme says, if we do this, we would be living a lie, and it would destroy our lives. And she was right. It did. They're like, indeed.
Yeah, but the trade-offs here, like, destroy our lives, but I mean, you're looking pretty good, so.
Like, I'm sorry, if you didn't want us to destroy our lives, like, why did you put that dress on? Like,
yes, agreed.
That's his monologue. That's not me saying that. That's his internal monologue.
Honestly, that's what I thought as a 12-year-old watching this. I definitely thought that was suspect. Like, if you guys aren't going to get together, then why are you looking like that? And why are you having this conversation in an incredibly romantic setting?
What's funny is there's so many red flags, including, like, a mini genocide where he kills the men and the children and the women, too. And he tells her, like, I killed the women and the children, too.
And she's like, do you want some crackers?
Yeah, I'm so sorry you had to do that, honey. But as a kid, I was like, that's perfectly normal and proportional response. Right. I did not catch the red flags. But to be fair, I was a toddler, and I was just there for the monsters at the end. Like,
how about the red flags where they're talking about democracy, and he's like, no, actually, authoritarianism is pretty dope. Like, somebody should just make all the decisions.
And then he's like, nah, I was just teasing. I was kidding. I totally don't believe that.
And then there's that look in her eyes where she's like,
Oh, but he's so hot, though. That's her internal monologue. It's like, he likes fascism, but he is really cute, even with that stupid hair, which is saying something. So
I think it's sort of funny, those conversations, like, when you're living in a democracy that is sort of crumbling, like, before your eyes, and is super, like, bureaucratic, and it's not working the way that it used to, like, how people like Anakin, young kids, can be disillusioned and, like, turn to the dark side without officially turning to the dark. Like, we could do this a little better if someone else called all the shots, I do think that's an interesting theme that they sort of explored, like, societal decline and how people start to search for different ways to handle those things.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at everything that Anakin has been through in his life. Like, if like, would the Empire, I mean, okay, ultimately the Empire is all about slavery, but like, if the Empire for some reason didn't like slavery, like, it would have eradicated slavery on Tatooine. Doesn't matter that it's in the Outer Rim. Like, it would have gotten the job done because it doesn't care about due process or local rights or anything like that. So it's actually not at all surprising that somebody who grows up the way Anakin does, and who's ultimately, taken into the Jedi Order too late to really have his values shaped by the Jedi. They've already been shaped in a sense by looking at what happens when you just let people do whatever they want. It's perfectly understandable that somebody would turn out that way.
Especially, too, so he gets rescued by these Jedi when he's 9 years old. He just has to leave his mom behind, and then they never free her. They never take care of her. They never, correct slavery in the Outer Rim, because that's not what the Jedi do, or not politically feasible. And then he hasn't seen her for 10 years. All of a sudden, he starts having these nightmares about her, goes home, and then his mom has been massacred in an incredibly brutal way. So, like, I mean, if I were in that circumstance, I'm not saying that I would commit a mini genocide, because, that's obviously bad and, not a proportionate response to what happened. But given everything that Anakin has been through, plus the fact that he's already, like, kind of unstable, it makes sense. Like, it's a natural progression for his character to kill all of those people. And mini side note, I do, as an adult, take umbrage with the depiction of Sand People, not only in this movie, but in previous Star Wars movies, how they've been sort of analogous to Native American savages, and that's not cool. And The Mandalorian has actually fleshed out Sand People some more by showing their language and their culture.
I liked that in The Mandalorian this season, sort of humanizing them and opening the viewer's eyes to the prejudices of the characters before.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and tangent, that also adds a level of red flagginess, if you will,
to the genocide.
Yes. It's like, you're murdering an indigenous people for really not a great reason. So,
can I do another tangent, which is, I didn't mention this before, but on near the top of my list of things that I love about this movie is Mace Windu. I think he's wonderful. I know that everybody hates him because people say that he is part of what drove Anakin to the dark side. I'm of the opinion that why Sidious was so brilliant is that he knew that Mace Windu had to be the way that Mace Windu was. There was no other way for him to be, and so he was basically putting them on a collision course together. It's not like Mace Windu had a ton of other options as far as, how he could welcome this person into the Jedi Order. But anyway, I love it. I mean, I think, the scene on Geonosis where he shows up and he puts the lightsaber to, Count Dooku's neck, and Jango Fett's neck, and he's like, this party's over, and then all the Jedi take out their lightsabers. Like, that is, to me, just one of the most incredibly, well orchestrated scenes. Like, just put aside all the context and all that, but just that one moment is just chef's kiss, beautiful Star Wars. And yes. I just don't we didn't get enough Mace Windu. There's a moment when he's on the battlefield and the clone says we've got a bunch of commando units ready for you, and he's like, cool, let's go. And then the scene shifts somewhere else, and it's I would like Samuel L. Jackson to do a miniseries that is just starting with that Battle of Geonosis, leading the commando units. I guess they're going to find Grievous or whatever, but I want to see more of him. I want to see more of that. I love how, first of all, I love how much he likes Star Wars. I think it's really cool that he's such a big fan, and he was like, can I have a purple lightsaber? I love the guy. He's no nonsense, and in a time where so much of the Jedi Order was nonsense, he has that perspective that I think is so important.
I will say about that, as a kid, I did not catch many of the nuances of this film, but one that I did catch, which is basically sometimes the Jedi are brutal and not always the good guys, comes in that last scene where Mace Windu chops off Jango's head. Right. And you have poor little Boba picking up his father's head. And as a kid, that resonates. You're I don't want to pick up my dad's head. Right. And I was that was sort of mean. That was uncalled for, And I think little touches like that, moments like that, even if you're a kid watching it, it sort of opens your eyes to this broader theme of, it's not all black and white with the sometimes their response is not proportionate, or their actions could have been thought through more beforehand,
I mean, right. Yeah, there's definitely there's an argument to be made that, listen, he's an active combatant, he's very dangerous, and he's already killed at least one Jedi that we saw on screen, the one who tries to get to Count Dooku. So dude's got to be taken out, but maybe beheading him
in front of his child.
All right, but do we know? He
has the Force.
No,
he could have sensed Boba's there.
So that's my question. Do we know that? I don't know that we do. But fair point. I guess. What are you gonna cut his hands off? Deflect a blaster bolt into? I mean, we know his armor, as Beskar armor, is not going to give, and when a blaster bolt hits it. So I don't know. I mean, he probably could have figured out another way, but in the heat of the moment, I'm willing to trust his discretion.
Doesn't he cut his hand off though before he chops his head off?
Yeah, it's not just the head. It's also he cuts off his hand and then. I mean, you don't see the Jedi behead people very often.
That's true.
That's true. You don't see the children of the beheaded pick up their heads very often. Yeah. And that scene was saying something I'm not saying that Jango was a good guy.
Yeah.
But, it was a pretty brutal way to kill him in front of his child.
And another great example of something that the Clone Wars series just picks up perfectly. I mean, just masterfully.
Yeah. Little radicalized Boba trying to blow up Mace Windu's ship.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Jango Boba plotline, while very small, you do get to see this relationship between father and son, even though son is technically clone of the father, aging normally. But you get to see the relationship between the two of them and how Boba as a child sees the Jedi as a threat to that relationship when Obi-Wan comes around. He doesn't recognize that what his dad is doing is wrong necessarily. He only wants to keep his family together. And then the idea of the Jedi as a threat is definitely confirmed when Mace Windu, whom I love, to be clear, but when Mace Windu extrajudiciously kills his father in an extremely brutal way. So it's a nice little backstory for Boba Fett, who is just some kind of rando who became unexpectedly popular after the original trilogy, and giving him real depth and meaning as a character. And on that note, well, it's kind of on that note, one more thing that I would like to discuss is how convoluted the plot is, because it really is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Like, it starts out with a bounty hunter, Jango Fett, hires another bounty hunter, whose name I don't remember, to kill Padme on the orders of Count Dooku. And then it just spins this completely convoluted, kind of nonsensical when you think too hard about it, plot that I think is one of the problems of the prequel series, is how it was, a lot of the stories were more complicated than they had to be, like unnecessarily.
Counterpoint.
Yeah.
Counterpoint.
Yes, please.
Those death worms and like the robot that delivered them to her room were pretty cool.
This is true. I mean, I'm not denying the coolness.
I enjoyed the I mean, I didn't always understand what was going on in the movie, but I enjoyed it. And I had like those moments where it's like, oh, like there's this shape-shifting bounty hunter and she's working for someone else, and like it made it more fun, in my opinion.
Makes it more.
I also liked how Jango, like, when he needed to kill the bounty hunter, was like, I'm going to use a saber dart that is like widely known to be directly traced back to the planet where I'm secretly helping the bad guys build a clone army. Like, that seems like, just in terms of like, if I were gonna like assassinate one of my like underlings, and
I mean, it sort of works though, right? Because Obi-Wan goes to the planet and they like end up using the army.
I mean, this is the tricky thing about Star Wars, right? Is on one level we know that you know, this is that it works the way Sidious wants it to. On the other hand, it has to, because this is happening before the outcome, which has already been determined, and it's not even clear in this case whether like Sidious like maneuvered that, like did he only give him like the Kaminoan saber dart, like does he not know, was that a happy coincidence? Like, so much of this is a question of like, it seems dumb for the character in the movie, but in the universe it obviously works for the Grand Master who's wants all this to happen.
Right. And I think that's a good example too of how Sidious's plan is only brilliant in hindsight, and because it has to be, but so many things could have gone wrong for him. Like, if just one coincidence hadn't happened, then he could have been found out. And that is a clear example of, if you know, he hadn't used a Kaminoan dart to kill his underling, would Obi-Wan have ever gone to Kamino, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
So raises all those questions. Another thing that I would like to discuss with you is the wonderful absolute trove of memes that came from this movie. Truly. I mean, we've got the I hate sand monologue. We have incredible, just perfection. We have, do you want to buy some death sticks? You don't want some death sticks. You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go.
It's such a good. That's such a good moment.
It's so good. You have I love democracy. Another classic one. like just
aggressive negotiations. People reference that. By the way, there's another one which is has been making the rounds on Reddit in the past few days, which is focused on the moment where Padme and the clone trooper fall out of the gunship, and Obi-Wan's like, "We got to keep going." And, like, there are people who have put on these memes where it's, like, Anakin saying, like, well, actually, you know, my original mission was to protect Padme, and she's not a warrior, and she's just been dropped in the middle of this battlefield, and she's kind of important, and we could always just call in Dooku's location and, like, get Yoda to go over there, which I just think is, like, so funny that it's a classic Star Wars where I don't know that anybody really thought too much about that moment before Reddit was like, oh, well, actually, it makes no sense to keep going. But shout out to that clone trooper for, you know, having to walk all the way back to the forward operating base. I also saw a funny meme where it was Obi-Wan says they got to keep going, and Anakin says, I think we should go pick them up because that clone trooper is, like, biologically only 10 years old, and we know that Padme has a thing for kids, so, like, it's probably not safe.
Ew. I'm going to skip right over that and note another good meme from that scene specifically is the "good call, my young Padawan," which not only is just a great line with "good call, my young Padawan," but it comes after Anakin tells the clones to aim just above or below the fuel cells, which is something he learned from Phantom Menace. So it's like a teeny tiny bit of continuity just pressed in there. Plus,
wait, is that true? I don't even remember that.
Yeah, because in the Phantom Menace, he destroys the ship by aiming just...
Oh, right.
Yeah. So he has
Wow,
that.
you just like pulled back another layer of Star Wars for me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I watched this movie obsessively. Like, I got it all. So...
Grace, what was your least favorite part of the movie?
You mean as a child or now?
Both. Okay.
So as a child, I got really, really bad secondhand embarrassment from Anakin at 2 points specifically that I would always have to fast forward through because I would just get too embarrassed. The first one happens right at the beginning of the movie.
Is it when Obi-Wan sort of reprimands him and
yes,
Padme?
Yes,
I hate it.
God.
My very young Padawan, you will learn your place.
Oh my God, the secondhand embarrassment is so real. And then the second is when Padme reprimands Anakin in front of the Naboo Council. So I guess I just don't like people publicly reprimanding their like underlings, I guess, you know, save that.
I do like that though about Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship. You can really tell Obi-Wan like struggles to have Anakin like follow his orders and respect him because it's more of like a big brother situation and not like, you know, this is my real master in a sense.
Right. You're not my real master.
Really yeah.
Qui-Gon was supposed to be my master. Yeah, that's a good point. But for baby Grace watching, it was just really bad secondhand embarrassment and I could not handle it. As an adult, my least favorite part, that's a bit more difficult. I think probably would have to be the Sand People murder scene, because I've previously defended it, and I do think that's necessary for Anakin's character, but I also think it could have been handled with more sensitivity and compassion for the Sand People, because they're almost like less than human in our knowledge. He says they're like animals and I slaughtered them like animals. And obviously as the viewer, you're supposed to go, whoa, that's a bit too far. But also as the viewer, we don't actually know anything about the Sand People. All we know about them is that they capture and murder people. So it adds a bit too much justification to the murder of an entire village. And as a little addition to that, I also do not like how Shmi, Anakin's mom, is used in this movie, kind of just as a plot point to die and further add to Anakin's descent, but also there's something a bit uncomfortable about her marrying the guy who bought her. Like,
Yeah.
It's a little messed up.
Yeah, he was her slave owner, and just because he freed her, like, there's something real weird there that was not properly addressed, in my opinion. So I would say just the lack of nuance.
I guess for me, it's like, how long was she his slave? Like, did
Right.
he buy her to marry her, or like, did he buy her to have her as a slave? And were they like, did she work for him for a long time before that happened? Maybe that's knowledge somewhere that I just don't know, but I feel like that would make a difference.
I'm sure it's on like the Star Wars wiki somewhere, but
Yeah.
the way that it is briefly described is just it's kind of
It's a little sketch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how George Lucas simultaneously overthought a lot of things, and also like didn't think enough about things, which I guess is just a way of saying like he made mistakes. But like the contrast when you think about like how much he tries to explain the tax trade stuff in like the Phantom Menace, like clearly like overthinking how much the audience needs to know. But then in the situations like this, it's like, well, he didn't actually give enough consideration. Just kind of threw it out there and assumed that like people would understand like good guy, bad guy, like he's a good guy, he freed her. But it's like, well, there's some other layers to this that if you're gonna leave that as it is, you need to at least explain like he freed her right away and like they had previously known each other somehow, you know, something like that you could do it. I mean, I can imagine ways it could be done, but like just kind of, you know, leaving it as it is, sort of very clear. Like, I mean, you know, I guess not surprising on one level that it wasn't his top priority, but it's a glaring example of it.
Haley, one thing that we absolutely have to discuss before we wrap this up is Padme's outfits. So
they're so good in this movie.
Other than the white jumpsuit, instantly iconic, what are your favorite outfits of this movie?
Let me Google it right now. There is a dress that she wears on Naboo that's like yellow, and she has those little like honeycomb looking things on her ears.
The field scene during the picnic scene.
I love that dress.
Such a pretty dress. Also, her dress during the "I hate sand" monologue, very pretty.
Yes, that's the white one, right?
Yeah, this white kind of flowy, shimmery, backless number. It's great. I really like that.
She had the best costumes. As a child, I did not like the black one that y'all had mentioned. I found it disturbing. I liked the field dress more.
Yeah, the field dress is great, and also just kind of ties into the story itself too, because she's on Naboo, her home planet, in this house where she used to spend her summers, and it really kind of identifies her as being very comfortable in this place and feeling carefree in a way that she can't in Coruscant or in the Senate.
Do we think she brought the dominatrix outfit like in the luggage, or was that already there in her closet? Like,
No,
did
she definitely brought it.
Okay.
Part of me thinks it's like a storytelling, like maybe intentionally this field dress, which these scenes I think happened before the fireplace scene. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So they're in the field. It's just like very pure, and she looks like happy, but the black dress to me just sort of like screams, I'm about to make a bad decision. Yeah. And that's sort of what they discuss in that moment. And part of me thinks, you know, that was intentional, but
I think that's a good point. And also right in the scene right before that, it shows they're at dinner while she's wearing the black dress, and he like cuts up a pear and sends it to her across the table using the Force.
Girls love that, by the way. That's what I found.
I don't know if this is what you're going to say, Grace, but I was researching before all this, and it was sort of supposed to be, or at least someone had suggested it was supposed to be like Edenic imagery of like the serpent feeding Eve the fruit or something like that, and it's like sort of trying to have this symbolism there of, yeah, this is sort of gonna be your downfall.
That actually was what I was going to say. Pretty close.
Well, I'm sorry for stealing it.
No, I did not. I was not even going to go as deep as Eve, so I'm glad you brought it up.
By the way, can I just say, speaking of luggage, one of my favorite moments is when they get off the transport on Naboo and they're walking with their luggage, and they're talking about how like there's some level of danger in all this, and I think it's Padme who says, like, there's nothing to worry about. We have R2 with us. And, like, Anakin laughs. And they're basically laughing at R2-D2 as if he's,
so
like...
mean.
As if he's wallpaper. And yet he ends up saving them, like, 100 times in this movie. And 3PO. Like, there's literally a scene, I guess, later on when they go to Geonosis. And Padme's about to get, like, electrified or whatever. Like, their molten fuel's about to...
with...
Yeah,
lava.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, she's about to get murdered, and R2 turns off the thing just in time. And I almost want to see a dub where he flies over her and he's like, "Yeah, you got R2 with you, huh? Yeah, that worked out pretty well. Like, how do you like me now? Like, I'm an R2 stan, so that scene like always bothered me that they were basically just laughing at this droid. Where he's like a Swiss Army knife soldier. Like, he's definitely the best protection you have.
That it's actually Anakin who says that line.
Which is even worse to me because he's your droid.
Friend. Yeah.
Or I guess no, he's not.
So
He's her droid still at that point, right?
Yeah.
It's unclear to me.
No, I think he was
Anakin's droid.
Oh,
okay.
Well,
he came off the ship with her. I was just rewatching this. In the first, you know when her ship blows up on Coruscant?
Yeah.
Right, you're
right.
right.
R2 is on the ship, so I assume he was hers at that point.
By the way, R.I.P. Dorme. R.I.P. to a real one.
Dorme.
Oh my gosh.
Or was it Corday? Was it Corday or Dorme?
I think it was Corday.
Okay. So
pour one
I could
out.
be wrong.
Never mind. Take it back. We do not R.I.P. Dorme, but we do R.I.P. Corday. Well, that seems as good a place as any to finish up this episode. One more thing I will add is that there is an absolutely ridiculous time during the Battle of Geonosis when C-3PO gets his head and his body detached, and
the puns.
The puns are insane. Like when his head is next to his body and he goes, "I'm quite beside myself," etc. So I felt like it wouldn't be a true Attack of the Clones episode until we just like mentioned that. But now we
thank you. We're good. Thank you so much, because that was honestly the best part of the Star Wars saga. That's the only pun I can think of that's explicit.
There are more of them.
Well, he does like, "Oh, this is such a drag."
Yeah.
Is this in the conveyor belt where they're like in this sort of factory setting?
Yes.
That scene always gave me stress for some reason.
I mean, it's
scary. Like
I did not like it. It was too dark in there, and they were all like almost dying. It was too much for me.
By the way, there's a great behind-the-scenes moment where it's Natalie Portman running along the conveyor belt, but like obviously everything is blue screen because it's Attack of the Clones. I take it back there. I just want to be clear, they did make a lot of models. I know a total respect to like Skywalker sound, like ILM, Lucasfilm art department, but it is a lot of CGI, and that scene was almost entirely CGI, and so Natalie Portman is like does the running sequence, and they're going to add in the obstacles later. And then she basically like turns to George Lucas after they're done filming and is like, "Is this a prank? Like, are you pranking me? Like, this is all like this is just fake, right?" So
good. So good. I remembered one other pun. He says, "I've lost my head."
Wow.
When he loses his head. All right. Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. So thank you for indulging me in my desire to justify my love for Attack of the Clones. I think we had pretty good conversation, and I think that we did 12-year-old Grace proud. She is very happy. If we recorded this podcast, took it back to 2007, and played it for her, I think she would be very proud of what we have discussed here today.
Do you think she would be confused about the premise that people don't like it?
Actually, yeah, because I also did not know until recently that it was not universally beloved. So maybe we would just like fast forward through that part to keep her innocence.
also, she'd be like, "What's Reddit?
What is a meme?
What's a podcast?" So anyway. Shout out to 2007 Grace. She was a real one.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening. If you want to share your thoughts about this episode or suggest topics for future shows, you can email us at hothtakes@gmail.com or find us on Twitter at Hoth Takes. I am Burdinator on Twitter, and Eric is at Eric Geller, and Grace is at Grace_Seegers. I made our logo and banner art, and Eric edited the show and put together our music. Although for legal purposes, we should note that all Star Wars themes and sound effects are the intellectual property of Lucasfilm. You can find a complete archive of past episodes on our website, hothtakes.wordpress.com. And if you like the show, share it with a friend. Just tell them to subscribe on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher. We'll see you next time. May the Force be with you.